Hello, my dear friends and family. I'm Operator Starsky, and today we're going to talk about something quite interesting that was mentioned quite a lot lately. Because Ukraine is building its own ballistic missiles, of course, we're talking about the FP9. We already mentioned it before in previous episodes, but today it's even more important because Ukraine is finally approaching the final stage of development. So in this episode, we're going to speculate just a bit why it's important for us and why Russians are being so hysterical in the social media while they still have access to the internet. Now let's get into it. First of all, what is FP9? It's a Ukraine-made ballistic missile developed by the company Firepoint. And according to the most recent statements from their chief designer Denis Stillerman, this missile is supposed to hit targets up to around 800-850 kilometers. That already tells you a lot, because not only we're talking about erasing the Russian front, but also the Russian rear. The Ukrainian deep strike strategy that proved itself so effective, so Russia, which is one of the world's top 3 oil exporters, lost almost half of its capacities due to Ukrainian drones only. Now, returning to FP9, that missile has a range of over 800 kilometers, speed over Mach 1, possibly even higher, with a warhead carrying around 800 kilograms or almost 2,000 pounds of explosives and precision roughly within 20 meters. Which kinda hints that this missile is something that is designed to hit stationary, big, important targets on the Russian territory. And one more thing that is very important is its speed. Stillerman said that their missile will hit faster than Russian Iskander. We're talking around 1200 meters per second or more versus 800 meters per second in Russian missile, which basically means that the Russians will have less time to react to the threat and less time to intercept the missile. Stillerman said that maybe 20-25% of missiles could penetrate air defense, which for ballistics is actually a lot. Now, the next question is, what can Ukraine actually hit with this missile? Because I always hear Moscow, and I mean, yeah, Moscow is well within the range of this missile, and it will definitely receive some greetings from Ukrainian people. But let's be honest, my friends, there are many other targets that matter much more in military sense. For example, Bryansk, Kursk, Belgorod regions, those are already heavily used for logistics, for supply and staging. For some reason, people underestimate the value of those territories, or rather, what they're being used for and what sort of Russian military assets are located there. But those territories can be easily reached by missiles like FP7. FP9 even expands the Ukrainian reach. This missile will be capable of hitting places like Voronezh, which is major military command and logistics hub for Russians, Rostov-on-Don, which is extremely important for the Southern Command and the war management, also Volgograd, where you have industry, transport, fuel routes, Kazan with their aviation industry, including strategic bombers, by the way. Then we have Nizhny Novgorod with defense industry and electronics. We have Tula region with weapons manufacturing, and we have Kaluga and Ryazan, which is their military bases and logistics. And of course, oil refineries, ammo depots, factories, command centers, basically all the things that make the Russian terrorists able to continue the war. And also one important thing that Stillerman said in his interview was he explained that hitting regions like Belgorod actually doesn't really change anything for Russia strategically or psychologically, but hitting Moscow, that's absolutely different thing, because Russia is extremely centralized and everything important for Russia's survival is in Moscow. So psychologically and politically, it's gonna hit much harder. And now let's talk about something that people are already asking. Does this mean that the war is shifting again from drones to missiles? Honestly, not exactly. Drones are still cheap and produced massively, and they are very effective for constant pressure. But missiles, and especially ballistic ones, Ukrainians prepare them for something absolutely different. They are for high-value targets, as well as heavily protected targets, and most importantly, fast strikes. Because right now, what we see is that drones and cruise missiles often struggle against strong air defense, especially around Moscow, and even the developer himself admits that. So ballistic missiles are kind of next step. It's not a replacement for drones, but more like a really important addition, which could slowly start something like a ballistic competition, because once one side starts using them more actively, the other side will respond, and Russian terrorists already rely heavily on ballistic missiles, for example, like Iskander. And now Ukraine is entering the same field. And now the most interesting part, my friends, magnificent Russian air defense. Because everyone always asks, can these missiles be intercepted? The short answer is, of course, yes, but it's really not that simple. Even systems like American Patriot sometimes struggle with high-speed ballistic targets. For example, we've seen that in the Middle East. Now, what about Russian air defenses? Do they have anything to be able to intercept ballistic threats? They technically have systems like S-300, several hundreds of them, S-400, around 50, 60, and newer S-500, which are very limited. On paper, S-400 is supposed to intercept ballistic missiles, but reality is always a bit different, as we all understand. First problem is coverage, because Russia doesn't have enough modern systems to cover everything. And from what we can tell, they concentrate those modern systems around Moscow, St. Petersburg, and some key military areas, which means many Russian regions are not well protected at all. The second problem is experience. As Stillerman said, Russian air defense didn't really deal with large-scale ballistic threats before, like Ukrainians, for example. To quote Mr. Stillerman, they will learn someday, and not instantly. And third problem is quantity, because even good air defense can be overwhelmed. If missiles are cheap enough and produced in large numbers, some will definitely get through, and even a few successful hits will be enough. And fact is, this is exactly what Ukraine is trying to do, because Ukraine is planning to produce FP9 in massive numbers. Because as Stillerman said himself, if you produce 2 or 3 missiles per month, it makes absolutely no sense, especially when you're competing with such a big enemy as Terror Russia. So if Ukraine proves of being capable of mass-producing cheap ballistic missiles like FP9 with such a long reach, maintaining effective air defense suddenly becomes a very big problem for the Russian terrorists. Which brings us to the conclusion. What do we have in the end? Ukraine is building its own ballistic capability, which is something that can actually bypass Russian defenses and hit them deep and very, very hard. This doesn't mean that something will instantly change on the battlefield, but it changes the long-term picture, because now the Russian terrorists have to think not only about the front, but also about their rear, and think about it very, very seriously. And maybe even about their capital city. And you know, something already tells me that Moscovians will enjoy fireworks very, very soon. With that, my dear friends and family, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, share this video, and support Ukraine. I'm Operator Starsky, and I'll see you in the next one.
Subscribe to UATV English and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.